Installing a Serena shade isn't difficult and only takes about 15 minutes. Here's how to install an outside mount above the trim Serena shade. Before you begin, open your box and make sure you have all the necessary parts: the shade, mounting brackets, and screws. You'll also need a cordless drill, a 3/32" drill bit, a number 2 Phillips drill bit and screwdriver, a pencil, a tape measure, and 4 or 6 D alkaline batteries, depending on the shade size, if you purchased a battery-powered shade. The first thing you should do is hold the shade up to the window to make sure it's the correct size. Place the entire shade on top of the trim. Center the shade and use a pencil to mark the wall at each end of the shade. Then, make a mark on the wall along the top of the shade about 2 inches in from the end of the shade. Next, find the center of your bracket by making a pencil mark 2 inches in from your first end mark. To determine the top placement of your bracket, measure at least 1/2 inch above your horizontal mark. This will be your guide for the top of the bracket. Repeat this process for the other side. Now, ensure the placement of the brackets will be level. Make necessary adjustments if your window trim isn't level to ensure the shade will hang correctly. If the brackets aren't aligned, the shade may not operate properly. Note, shades wider than 45 inches will need a third bracket. Install this bracket 2 inches to the left of the drive, the box in the middle of the headrail. If the shade is wider than 72 inches, you'll need to install a third and fourth bracket. Install each of these 1/3 of the way in from the outer brackets. Next, you will need a spacer to ensure the shade clears the window trim. Mount the spacer securely to the wall. The hardware included with your shade will mount the bracket to the spacer. Now, using the brackets as a guide, mark hole locations on your spacer. Pre-drill holes for the screws. Then place the bracket flush against the spacer and the wall, aligning the holes. Drive a screw through the holes in the bracket and through the spacer. If you'll be controlling your Serena shades with the Pico wireless control, you'll need to reposition the antenna holder. Unsnap the antenna holder from the headrail and move it out to the operating position behind the headrail. Then snap it into place. If you're controlling your shade with an IR remote, your shade won't have an antenna. Next, install the shade in the brackets. Holding the shade in both hands, tilt the top of the shade slightly away from you and hook the front edge into the brackets behind the battery release tabs. Then gently tilt the shade down at each bracket and firmly press the bottom of the headrail until you hear it click into place. Important, make sure not to catch any fabric cells in the brackets. Now you can install the batteries if you have a battery-powered shade. Press the battery release tabs above the headrail. The headrail will tilt forward, exposing the battery trays. Install the batteries as indicated in the battery trays. For best battery life, use only D-size alkaline batteries. Don't mix old and new batteries or battery types, or use carbon zinc batteries. Also, don't use rechargeable batteries. Once all the batteries are in place, the LED indicator light will flash briefly. Grasp the headrail with both hands and tilt it back into the brackets, pressing gently until you hear a click. If you have a shade that uses the plug-in power supply instead of batteries, attaching the power supply is simple. Press both battery release tabs above the headrail to expose the cable. Uncoil the cable and plug it into the plug-in power supply. Then, tilt the headrail back into place and plug the plug-in power supply into an outlet. Your shade is now powered. If you have any questions regarding installing your Serena shades, please call Serena Support at 1-888-445-8063. Our support staff is available to help you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.